Welcome to the very last screencast of Apes. To those of you who've watched all these screencasts, thank you very much. I've been doing these for a year now, and I'll tell you, it's quite something for me personally to get to the end of it. All right, so this last one is on endangered species, and it's a sad topic, but it's definitely an important one we need to talk about. What you're looking at right now, that lovely bird you're looking at, is the spotted owl. It is a rather famous example of an endangered species from my state of Washington, and an example of how legislative efforts were able to keep this beauty from extinction. Okay, so when a species becomes globally extinct as opposed to locally extinct, that means it's gone forever, right? So its contribution to biodiversity on the planet is gone, and it can't be brought back. I say that. I mean, I guess now with Jurassic Park level genetic engineering, it might be possible. It hasn't happened yet. So let's just say, you know what, gone is gone, extinct is gone. Now that basically causes the biodiversity of the planet to go down, and because all organisms are interconnected in an ecosystem, the extinction of one species ripples across the entire ecosystem. I just have a couple famous examples here on this page. Notice they're not photographs because they went extinct before people photographed them. So one is the dodo bird. So the dodo bird lived on the island of Mauritius, which is near Madagascar. It's a beautiful place. My son went there, says it's quite lovely. Now, the dodo bird it's like the globulus. It lived on an island where there were no natural predators, so it had no instinctive desire to run away. It didn't understand what predation was. So when Europeans showed up, they're like, "There's this big bird. It looks delicious. Let's just go club it." And they would just look at you while you raised your club and killed it. It didn't never ran away. And so, I mean, when I was a kid, we used the word dodo to mean stupid. You're a dodo. It means you're dumb, because people felt like these birds must be dumb not to run away. But it's just that they evolved in an ecosystem where there was no predator, so they had no reason to run away. Now, another one is the passenger pigeon. So this is a native of North America. They say that before they went extinct, that the skies would darken for days as these flocks of hundreds of millions of these birds would fly by. Now, they were a dominant species at the time. They nested in this particular habitat, which was mature hardwood forest, which, when people showed up, when Europeans showed up in North America, they cut down those hardwood forests and they planted crops. And so there's habitat destruction, and people started hunting them. So we're going to see those are two big factors in determining whether or not a species is going to go extinct. Sure enough, they're all gone now. None of them are left, and they can't be brought back. So that's what we mean by extinction. So what are the causes of extinction? Well, there's lots of things that can cause extinction, but it's worth looking at each of them in turn. Okay, so one is something we can't do anything about, right? Movies make it sound like we can. I don't think we can, and that's like the impactor. So it's like a comet, an asteroid. When something like that hits the planet, it causes massive, massive extinction events. And primarily it's because it alters the entire climate of the planet for a prolonged period of time very rapidly. And organisms simply cannot respond to rapid change. But as I said, like, even though that this has caused two, for sure, massive extinctions on our planet, that's not really the issue we're talking about here. Okay, so this has nothing to do with humans. Everything else does. Okay, so climate change. Impactors cause climate change. That's why they're so devastating. Well, climate change is happening now because humans put anthropogenic carbon dioxide and methane in the air. So basically, ice ages have come and gone, even without human help. And when ice is growing, it changes the weather patterns. It changes the location of the biomes. And as these changes happen, and this ice can come and go fairly quickly, it changes the climate of the planet faster than species can respond. Right. So like during the last ice age, you had things like cave bears and woolly rhinoceros and woolly mammoth and saber-toothed tigers. Those things are all gone. And although the humans might help make them go away, a lot of them just went away because of climate change caused by the natural growing and shrinking of continental glaciers. Disease can cause extinction, but not usually. It's not like humans are going to go extinct because of COVID. It just means that when you have a species that's already like not doing well, like its numbers are low, and maybe there's low genetic biodiversity, like or rather low genetic biodiversity, a disease can come along, can kind of be like the final knockout blow that pushes it over the edge. We've definitely seen that happen in the last century. I'd say probably the biggest one, though, is loss of habitat. If an organism doesn't have the habitat it needs to live, it doesn't live. And unfortunately, humans are notorious for changing landscapes. Right? We come in and we chop down forests, and we plant the things we want to grow, and reroute rivers, and we build dams, and we build cities, and we do all this stuff. When you take habitat and you shrink it, or you dissect it with roads, and you fragment it, what happens is a lot of species at least, they're not able to continue to survive. They need more space to go. They're stressed by this weird thing in their way, whether it's a pipeline or a road or a farm, and they don't want to cross it. And so now they need a larger range than they're getting, and they go extinct. Invasive species, and we talked about invasive species in the previous screencast. So invasive species have caused a lot of extinctions, especially on islands with endemic species where there's small populations to start with, and then you bring in some exotic species, and it outcompetes or it preys upon these other organisms. Pollution can also be impetus for extinction. So basically, biomagnification almost caused the extinction of many bird species in North America before we realized the problem caused by DDT. So those persistent organic pollutants, they biomagnify. So these higher trophic level organisms tend to have a lot of them in them, and especially bird species like eagles and stuff, and orca whales, they're particularly effective. But then there's also other types of pollution, thermal pollution, nutrient pollution, BOD pollution. It can cause drops in dissolved oxygen that can cause aquatic organisms to go extinct. And then, unfortunately, one of them is simply predation or poaching. So humans have a tendency, not just humans, but let's just say humans. Humans have a tendency to want to hunt things. And there have been many species hunted to extinction by humans, including woolly mammoths in North America. When humans were basically an invasive species. They crossed the land bridge, and during one ice age, got North America and hunted a lot of things to extinction. Here's just a picture that sort of has like a list of different things, and there's a few things we didn't talk about here, like lack of genetic diversity, we talked about earlier in the year about the cheetahs, having that bottleneck that left them with so little genetic biodiversity. But basically, that makes you susceptible. But we're just going to keep going here. Okay, extinctions have happened throughout history. Look, there's no dinosaurs anymore, right? There's no saber-toothed tigers anymore, no woolly mammoths anymore. These things went extinct without humans helping them, most of them. Okay. And a lot of times these things go extinct. Things are going extinct constantly. They call it background extinction rates. But then there'll be these certain events that cause a lot of extinctions. So these are mass extinction events. So there's been a number of them. And so like the most famous one is the KT boundary one. This is where the dinosaurs died and many other species died out. Basically, about 30% of the species in the world died in a very short period of time after an impactor hit what is now the Yucatan Peninsula of Mexico. The climate change caused a bunch to die during the Permian. So there's been a number of this, basically really 5 biggies, okay? And turns out you're living in the 6th one. So right now, right now, as human population grows, the rate of extinction is growing. So this curve here shows here's human population growth, here's extinctions that we know of. And there's plenty of things we don't even know what they are, and they've gone extinct because of our actions. And you see it's going up alarmingly. And so basically the current extinction rate is probably 10 to 100 times greater than it was in even the worst extinction events in Earth's geologic history. So basically, we've all grown up hearing about the dinosaurs going extinct, right? Well, you are living through a more profound extinction event than what they endured. All right, and it's largely the fault of humanity. Will the world survive? Of course it will, and there'll be adaptive radiation. There'll be new species come along, but it's it's something that we shouldn't be taking lightly. And there's things we can do to stop it, and we need to do so, and we are doing so. Now, the 2 biggies I would say, though, are habitat loss and climate change. And climate change causes habitat loss. So these are what really cause large-scale changes in an ecosystem. And basically, organisms that aren't able to adapt to it go extinct. So who goes extinct? Generally, it's the specialist species. Generalists are able to adapt, right? That's kind of like that's their thing. That's what they evolved to do, is to adapt. But specialist species, they've got one job to do in that ecosystem. If that ecosystem changes where they can't do that anymore, they don't have the ability to switch to something else. A panda bear is not going to stop eating bamboo and start eating something different. And not going to have koala bear is not going to stop eating eucalyptus and start eating apples. It just doesn't work that way. And so basically, these specialist species have very specific nesting habits, eating habits, mating habits, whatever. And if their ecosystem changes, they can't adapt. So habitat loss and habitat loss can be caused by climate change. These are the real killers of most species. So what are the risk factors that make an organism likely to go extinct? Well, okay, they make sense. Okay, one of them is having a small population size. If there's not a lot of the species out there, not a lot of individual members, there's not that many to die. So it makes sense that it's easier for them to die off if there aren't that many to start with. And that's why endemic species of islands, that's where a lot of these extinctions are happening, because anything that comes to that island is basically an exotic species. And so, like those brown tree snakes I talked about in the invasive species screencast, a small population is just going to be vulnerable. And also, it turns out K-selected species, say like elephants, rhinoceros, they tend to be, panda bears. They have small populations because they just don't breed very often. Right, so they are naturally K strategists start off with a fairly small population to begin with, and so they are far more likely to be affected. So remember, they're the larger members. They have larger territorial needs. They have smaller population sizes. Another thing that makes you at risk is being at a high trophic level. So if you're at a high trophic level, there's two things. One is, remember, biomagnification. The farther up you are in that food pyramid, the more those toxins concentrate in your body, and the more likely you are to have negative impacts from those. Now, fortunately, humans have come to realize what POPs are, and we've eradicated the vast majority of them. And they're still cycling in the planet, they're still causing, they're still magnifying, but they do have defined half-lives, and they are reducing over time. But you also have the fact that if something, when you're at a high trophic level, you're depending on everything below you. And if something goes wrong below you, something down there goes extinct, it can have ramifications higher up the food pyramid. Clearly, another one is being a specialist. Being a specialist is a great thing when you have a stable environment. When you have an unstable environment, it's a terrible thing. And so basically, if you have a specialized diet or very specialized nesting habits, you're really unlikely to survive when conditions start to change. So climate change and habitat loss really affect things that are specialist species. And the other one is having limited genetic biodiversity. So if it's a species that maybe had a genetic bottleneck in the past, there's not a lot of gene variants, then if, say, a disease comes along or some sort of environmental change like a drought comes along, there's just not enough variations among the population's genes to allow for any of the offspring to be able to handle that. And so the whole species will go extinct. So what can we do about it? All right. So one thing we can do is let's just start with hunting. That's the easiest one, right? You outlaw it. Okay, so passing laws is really the most important thing we can do to try to save species. So it is a classic tragedy of the commons. If you don't have government stepping in and saying not to do this, then people are going to go like, hey, you know what? What's one more rhinoceros? I'm just going to kill that one, and my family will get a lot of money for that rhinoceros's horn, right? That elephant's ivory. But the problem is there's a lot of people, and there's only so many of these species. So the trick is you need to criminalize poaching. So you have to designate species that are endangered, and you have to protect them. And so basically, things like elephants, rhinos, gorillas, they're definitely at risk of being hunted to extinction. Apart from all the other stressors, the habitat loss and global warming are affecting them as well. But also, people hunt them. So basically, if you pass laws against hunting them, and then you have to pay people like this guy here to go out and monitor where these things are, to have a good communication, to have weapons so you can fight off the poachers. In many African countries, even though they may not have a lot of other infrastructure, most of them understand that this is an important thing. And it's not just altruism, it's good for them, their economy. So there's a lot of eco-tourist dollars that come to countries. A lot of people like myself, I'm planning on spending a ton of money one of these summers to go to Africa to see the Great Migration, to see gorillas, to see chimpanzees. and these things are protected by people with machine guns, and my money's helping to support them when I go. Okay. Habitat loss is a biggie, all right? And so habitat fragmentation is definitely a thing that causes a lot of extinctions. So many species have fairly large territories, and when they do, if you fragment their territory, they go extinct. So one thing you can do is try to avoid that. Set aside large portions of land as roadless areas or wilderness areas. Uh, avoid putting pipelines and roads to the areas that are critical habitat. Another thing what you can do is you can identify areas that need protection and then protect them. And if it's too late for that, you could put in wildlife corridors that basically connect one larger area with another larger area. Like here's a highway, which is definitely a classic thing that fragments habitat, and they put it like an overpass that has plants on it, so an animal can wander across here. And a lot of them are too freaked out by it, but some of them, they get used to and they cross over. So that's one thing you can do. Another thing you can do is not just identify habitat, but you can identify certain what we call biodiversity hotspots. So a biodiversity hotspot, and there's 34 of them that have been identified on the planet. These are places on the planet where we say, look, there's a high level of biodiversity here, and it's threatened. And so we really have to protect this because so much of the world's biodiversity is located here, and it's threatened. So we identify these, and we put resources into protecting these. And so, as I said, there's 34 of them located around the planet. And by identifying these things, it gives us the ability to try to conserve the biodiversity that is there now and hasn't been lost. Another thing you can do, since habitat loss is a biggie, you can restore habitat in some cases. Okay, so it's difficult to rebuild a rainforest, but there's other things you can rebuild. Okay, like a riparian zone around a river. Okay, so if human activity, like the biggie is agriculture, has impacted the habitat too much, the species can be in danger of extinction. So a classic example is the Louisiana black bear. So the Louisiana black bear was close to extinction. It doesn't have a very big range, just like a few hundred square miles. All right, and most of it had been destroyed and fragmented by agriculture practices. So people identified the need. They said, "Okay, here's what we're going to do." And this is courtesy of a thing we're going to talk about in a minute called the Endangered Species Act. They said, "Look, let's restore the habitat that this bear needs. Let's put in corridors. Let's build habitat that it likes." And in the last 20, 30 years, the numbers of these bears have doubled, and it's no longer considered to be endangered. So the main thing we got to do is you got to have legislation. If you're going to save species, you have to have laws that protect them. Okay, like I said, like passing laws to make it a crime to poach. So the two big laws that you need to know for the apes test that deal with this are the Endangered Species Act. It's a United States law. And I don't know, I just pronounce it CITES. I don't know if people call it CITES. I don't know. Okay, but basically, this one here is the United States law. This is an international treaty. Let's talk about both of them. So the Endangered Species Act is really important, and it's a model for the rest of the world. So basically, in 1973, the United States passed this law, and basically what it says is they said, look, the U.S. Fish and Wildlife Service has to make an inventory of all the species we have and identify them as either being endangered, threatened, vulnerable, or okay, right? So basically, an endangered species is one that is in danger of going extinct. If we don't do anything, it probably will go extinct. So it is in danger of extinction. A threatened species is one that, without interventions, it will become endangered and then will go extinct. So basically, it's kind of like we see what's coming. Let's intervene now before it becomes endangered. If it's vulnerable, that means it's likely to become threatened. Okay. Now, here's what's important about this law, though. It said, look, if we identify, like, okay, this fish is in danger of going extinct, what is it? Oh, it's this pollution. Well, so whoever's polluting the stream has to stop. Like this fish is getting protected. Our job is to make sure it doesn't go extinct, and we have to mitigate your. You can't pollute anymore, or you can't build your dam, or you can't harvest this forest. So it allows a lot of encroachment on people's rights of commerce. Because it puts the preservation of the species first, and it has what we call teeth. It has these fines that can be levied, and it basically it gives this government organization a lot of authority to regulate all aspects of contributing to the threat. Here's an example from my neck of the woods. The beginning, I start off with a picture of spotted owl. So then this isn't necessarily didn't that great. I mean, it's not over yet, but it's not like the rousing thing like the Louisiana black bear. But here you go, spotted owl. It only nests in what are called snags. Those are old dead trees in old growth forests. So when trees get to be, over 1,000 years old, they die, and then but they don't fall over. And so this wood is soft, and basically these owls can dig nest holes in them, right? So they have to have these old dead trees to build their nests. That's a specialist for you, right? Now, logging activities, they come and they clear cut. Right? And that means they take down, even though they're not going to harvest that tree, they're still just going to cut it down, right? So basically what happened was they were shrinking and fragmenting the habitat that this owl species needed, and the government organization that was in charge of it saw like, hey, guess what? The numbers of this bird are dropping. So because we have the Endangered Species Act on our side, we can say, hey, no more logging. Oh man, people hit the roof over this, right? It's like, what? You're ruining people's economy. But when I moved to Washington State, it was a fiasco. Like everybody's like, that spotted owl is ruining my livelihood. Well, look, you've already destroyed most of the forest. You just destroy the rest of it. Yeah, again, it's the typical tragedy, the commonest thing, being circumvented by governmental authority. So they said, no, you got to set aside large tracts of untouched forest so this species doesn't go extinct. And guess what? It worked. Now, it worked for a while, and then the barred owl, which wasn't really an exotic species, but it moved in and started out competing. So then they actually had to start capturing barred owls and moving them out. But by doing that, they have been getting the numbers of the spotted owl to come back. Now, will they save the spotted owl? We don't know, but you have to applaud the attempts because it can work, and you should never it's not okay to say this species doesn't matter. Just go ahead and log. Okay, so CITES stands for the Convention on International Trade in Endangered Species and Flora and Fauna. I just left that part out, okay? Now, let's see, that's my wife, and she says she just left a friend's house. She's at the subway. She'll be here soon. Okay, perfect. Just in time for me to finish this. Okay, so this is an international agreement, okay? And basically what it says is you cannot, it basically it puts in place regulations preventing the trade of either live specimens or products, say like elephant tusks, okay, or rhino horns. Okay, so if it's derived from an endangered species or is an endangered species, you're not allowed to sell it and trade it and profit from it. And so the idea is it can prevent endangered species from going extinct, and it can prevent species from becoming endangered. And so you have countries all over the world are collaborating on this. And because it doesn't have quite the same legal power that an individual nation can have, like with the Endangered Species Act, it hasn't been quite as successful, but it has been somewhat successful. Okay. Now, with the CITES and the Endangered Species Act, we have certain designations we give to organisms. Okay, so we can say they're extinct. All right, that basically means we know they don't exist anymore. That we know for a fact that has not been seen anywhere on the planet is gone. We say it's extinct in the wild. So, like, there's a few species like the white rhinoceros of Africa or the golden toad of Central America. These things they're no longer in the wild at all, but they still exist in zoos, so in captivity. Now, hope is maybe it hasn't gone extinct. If we can keep it going here, maybe the habitat can come back and we can re-release it. Okay, although the genetic biodiversity is limited when you have just zoo populations. Things could be critically endangered. That means like it is really likely this species is going to go extinct. Endangered means it's likely to go extinct if we don't intervene. Vulnerable means it's likely to become endangered if we don't intervene. And we can say it's near threat. And that means there's a high risk of extinction in the near future if we don't do anything. And then we have least concern. It's like a raccoon in a way that was going extinct. We don't worry about it. Okay, this is the last slide of the year, guys. The last slide of the year. Sorry to cram so much in this last one. Okay, so there's 5 criteria that determine the risk of a species of going extinct. Okay, so one is there's a reduction in population. So you had a large population is getting smaller. That's a pretty good sign that you're likely to go extinct. The other one is if you have limited geographic range. the species is constrained to just a small area. Okay, especially if that area is shrinking. Okay, so it used to be here, now it's here, or it's just an island. So there's not much to begin with. Another one is if the population is estimated to be 2,500 adults, but it's in decline. All right, so that's a small enough population, but the problem is it's getting smaller. Or the population is 250 adults, which is really small and not declining. But even at that point, you may not have enough genetic biodiversity to survive any kind of future stressors. And then if just different mathematical computations indicate that extinction of the wild has a 20% possibility in the next 5 generations. So these criteria, how they use these criteria to decide whether or not to assign something to be critically endangered, vulnerable, and so on. Okay, guys, it's been a long year. There's been a lot for you to learn, and I know it's hard. And I appreciate you watching these. I appreciate the effort you're putting in. Thank you, and we're going to start getting ready to review for that test. Okay, so thanks for watching, and good job.